Welcome to another edition of Hume and O'Neill. Federal MPs Jane Hume and Claire O'Neill go head-to-head on the topics that have dominated headlines this week. Before we get into the debate, of course, you've each got 1 minute to, talk about a topic that's captured your attention. Jane Hume, your mission this week is to make the digital economy announcement riveting for our viewers, so have at it.
It is riveting. I mean, who wasn't touched by the digital economy last year, Tom? We used contactless payments, QR codes, we were remote learning, we bought things online. It changed the way we did business, it changed the way that we operated our social lives. In fact, McKinsey suggested that, in fact, Australia vaulted forward in its digital uptake by 5 years in just 8 weeks at the beginning of March last year. So how do we capitalise on that new willingness to adopt digital technology? The Prime Minister has said that we want Australia to be a leading digital economy by 2030. And that, of course, is the impetus behind the digital economy strategy that we launched yesterday. The digital economy strategy works on the foundation stone investments that we've already made into things like the NBN, CDR, 5G, cybersecurity. It looks at emerging technologies like AI and Internet of Things and blockchain and quantum computing, and says how can we build skills and capabilities, scholarships and centres of excellence in these areas. And it also looks at our digital business priorities. So things like how we get small and medium enterprises to take up things like e-invoicing that can reduce the cost of invoicing by $20 per invoice. How do we use our traditional industries like mining and agriculture and construction and bring in digital skills and capabilities that will vault them into new levels of productivity? How do we bring in emerging industries like fintech and regtech, where we're already top 3 in the world, and also the gaming industry, for which we've provided a 30% refundable tax offset. The gaming industry is actually worth $255 billion worldwide. Australia at the moment makes $144 million, and it has such extraordinary transferable skills, and it's a really attractive technological industry to have. And then finally, how do we make government services seamless and frictionless? So this is what the digital economy strategy is all about, but why do we do it? That's the what, but why do we do it? We do it because it creates a more productive, it's more productive for businesses, it creates economic growth, it brings in those better and higher paying jobs, and it makes people's lives better.
All right, passion there from Jane Hume. Claire, what's on your radar this week?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I've just spent 2 days moving across Brisbane and talking to a lot of senior Australians about I think the fears and the hopes that they have for next week. It's going to be a pivotal week in the aged care debate in Australia. The government's had 8 years to do something about the horrific situation for many Australians living in aged care, and instead of actually contributing more to the sector, they've cut funding, which has really devastated the outcomes for a lot of older people. Tom, Anthony Albanese gave a really important speech this week where he talked about one of the things that Labor will be looking for in the budget this upcoming week, and that is a really significant response on dementia care. This is a part of aged care that doesn't get the kind of airtime that some other issues get, but it affects an extraordinary number of Australians, 500,000 with dementia, 1.6 million Australians who care for them. And I'm sure, Tom, a lot of your viewers will know the real heartbreak that comes for families when someone in the families contracts this disease. So what we want to see is proper training and support for aged care workers, really tight regulations for aged care organisations who ought to have to prove that they've got competency to deal with dementia care, and a range of other initiatives that we think are really important. So for your viewers out there, dementia should be core business in aged care, and that's something that Labor really wants to see expressed in the budget this week.
All right, well, not long to go until we see that budget. First, let's recap the week's big news, though. Prime Minister Scott Morrison, just this morning, capping off an interesting week in terms of India. The travel ban will end on its planned expiry date, that's May 15, following a fierce backlash against the harsh measures. Let's recap how that all unfolded, including more COVID concerns out in New South Wales.
But what's important is that the biosecurity order that we have put in place has been highly effective. It's doing the job that we needed it to do, and that was to ensure that we could do everything we can to prevent a third wave of COVID-19 here in Australia.
The testing lines are back, and so are the restrictions. Long queues formed at Bondi this morning with news of a second case in the eastern suburbs outbreak.
In other states, they would have locked down the whole city. They would have closed businesses.
You know, they adopt their approach.
we adopt ours.
If this was WA or Queensland, they would have shut down the whole city.
Jane, what's happening at the moment in India is not Australia's fault, but the blocking of Australian citizens is what has frustrated and disappointed a lot of people. Hindsight, it's a wonderful thing. If a year ago the government had begun to build extra quarantine capability, however that happened, we'd be in a much better situation, wouldn't we?
Well, in fact, we had been building extra capacity at Howard Springs. We've put in an extra $500 million into Howard Springs, and it now has the capacity to take on 2,000 people. The hard part, of course, is making sure that the medical resources in Darwin can cope with a significant outbreak. Just before that travel ban was put in place, around 57 people were COVID positive in Howard Springs, and resources were stretched to their limit. On top of that, 1 in 8 people on the last 2 flights from India were COVID positive. And the reason why the travel ban took place was in response to medical advice to say, just pause temporarily until we can
right.
cope
but that was
with
because
that number of outbreaks,
there was only that one
make sure
facility
we have
there,
resources to deal
one
with.
extra facility. Again, the same question.
Well,
I understand there's been more capability at Howard Springs, but more than that is a possibility. All the billions spent on COVID, a couple of billion more and more capability would have been a good investment a year ago, would it not?
Well, actually, our hotel quarantine system has been working very well. I think the Prime Minister said yesterday that if somebody had have asked him a year ago, can you create a 99.9% effective hotel quarantine system, he would have said, well, they would have said that he was over-promising. But in fact, that's what has been done. And I think that Australia deserves accolades for the fact that its hotel quarantine system has worked particularly well.
So more capability wouldn't
more in
help.
quarantine. I actually think this has been a temporary pause. It wasn't one that we wanted. It wasn't one that we planned for, but it was an important one. And now we get a chance to lift that ban and start repatriating Australians. We've already brought over 20,000 Australians back from India. And that's actually something that we should be proud of.
Yeah, I have a different view about it, Tom. I mean, I think we've got today still 35,000 Australians, citizens of this country, who are actually unable to get back into Australia because they're overseas, and there's real capacity constraints on the way that we've managed quarantine. Your viewers would have known this back the front. Quarantine is a federal responsibility. It's in Section 51, subpart 9 of the Constitution, if anyone wants to look it up. And instead of actually taking responsibility for this pivotal part of protecting Australians from coronavirus, essentially that's been pushed onto the states. And
hang on, but let's just jump in on that one.
These hotels were never designed to be long-term solutions.
The states agreed to take on hotel quarantine, didn't they?
Yep, that's right, Tom. And I think if we go back to that time when Australia was in crisis and we were desperately trying to find short-term solutions for ways to deal with coronavirus, fine, that was the only option we had before us. But the truth is, and you've seen multiple state governments come out and say this hotel quarantine system is not actually fit for purpose. And we're going to see continued breaches of it, and we're going to see continued state lockdowns, state shutdowns, borders being closed.
Well, you don't have to have
until
the
we get a better solution to this quarantine problem.
Has taken on the most people by far per capita and managed to do it pretty well. Victoria was the letdown, so it's possible to do it better. It's just that Victoria failed, and thousands of people would be back in Australia if not for Victoria's failures. That's true as well, isn't it?
Well, I think that the issue is that, the Victorian government, like the West Australian government, like the Northern Territory and every other government around the country, is trying to do a good job of hotel quarantine, but most of them are still saying that this is not the best solution. I mean, come on, Tom, we've got these hotels in the middle of the city that don't often have, ventilation that's required, that can't separate coronavirus potentially infected people from other patrons using the hotels. And there's a lot of people who are health experts saying this is just not right. And Tom, this is actually really costing us as a country. Every time these outbreaks happen, things have to be shut down. People have to take on extra precautions, and it doesn't have to be this way. If the federal government had a bit more foresight, we wouldn't be in this situation.
Let me put this finally to you, Jane.
And look at New South Wales.
The federal government,
look at that New South Wales.
the federal government, and I know that, and I pointed out New South Wales, Jane. But right now, the federal government is looking at this Victorian proposal for more capability. If we need it now, would have been great to have it for the past year, surely.
Well, and the Prime Minister said that, we'll keep an open mind about that and we'll have a look at the proposal. Of course, no proposal comes from a state government without a bill, and it's quite a significant bill at that. But the question is, do we need it? Is it fit for purpose? Is it the right decision to make? And that's something that we'll consider. But it doesn't come without cost. The hotel quarantine program has been run very effectively in New South Wales, and we're seeing that now. I think that that was the gold standard. If other states didn't have their hotel quarantine up to snuff, we paid the price for it. But in fact, Australia has handled its quarantine program exceptionally well. As the Prime Minister said, 99.9% effective. You couldn't have promised that and been believable a year ago, and that's exactly what's been done.
Yeah, I mean, I think the real issue here, Tom, is thinking about this. A lot of the coronavirus things that were done a year ago were put in place as short-term measures that have since sort of melded into being longer-term solutions. And I put the mRNA facility and the vaccine issues that we're having in that bucket too. The reality is that we are going to be dealing with this problem for many years, and we need to have solutions that are going to last for many years. And I'm not sure that hotel quarantine on its own is the right way to start.